Nothing on the show is to be construed as legal advice. The contents of this show are for informational purposes only.
Hello, welcome to another episode of Know Your Rights, the Consumer Law Cast with me, Abbas Kazerouni. We've got two of the usual suspects here. We've got attorney Mona Amini and attorney Ali Sadrarhami. Welcome, guys.
Thank you for having us. Always a pleasure to be here.
So today we're going to be talking about data breaches, everybody. They are an absolute epidemic of them in the United States right now. And I think with the increase of technology, you're going to get more scammers, both nationally and internationally. And companies have a duty to kind of secure your data because we're interacting with companies much more online than we were before, much less transactions over the counter like back in the day. So with that said, we're going to be talking about some California specific statutes. We're going to be talking about, how you can protect yourself outside of California as well and what protections you may have. And then also specifically as it pertains to medical data breaches. So California for, non-medical data breaches has the CCPA. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that, Mona?
Sure. So, in most states, you're kind of limited to common law remedies for a data breach. Here in California, being that it's a little bit more consumer friendly, we actually have a somewhat recently enacted statute that protects consumers who are victims of data breaches, and they can actually pursue statutory damages against these companies when their data is, negligently released in a data breach. So it does have limitations where certain companies only fall under the statute or certain types of information fall under the statute. But for the most part, if it's a serious data breach and your social security number or, sensitive information like that is released, you're most likely going to fall under, the protection of that statute.
And when you talked about statutory damages, what were you specifically talking about?
So there's a range. It starts at $100 and goes up to $750 per breach victim or per incident.
Okay, and then we were talking about some, private information, for example, right? So obviously, if your name and your social security out there, I think you said you fall within it, but I don't think social security number is necessarily dispositive of whether you have, a CCPA violation or not, right? So for example, can you give me some other data points that could also fall under the CCPA?
Yeah, sure. So social security number is one example of them, and it's probably one of the common ones that you'll see in a data breach notice. Other than that, something else that comes up a lot is another type of identifying number, like your driver's license number, or maybe if you have any other sort of government ID number, something that's specific to you that's involved in a data breach that could also qualify for, to fall under the protection of the CCPA. Other types of personal information that fall under the statute are going to be like an account number or a credit card or a debit card number. And if it's paired with like a PIN number or a password or some sort of access code. Other sorts of information that's a little bit more technical is like biometric information. Let's see what else. Things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you've given a pretty I wouldn't call it an exhaustive list, but it was pretty exhaustive. Yeah, essentially, if your data has been breached where you have your name and one other piece of identifying piece of information that would normally be deemed private, like your driver's license or your credit card number or your address, social security number, that kind of stuff, it's always worth calling somebody like Mona to see if you have a case. Now, Ali, I'm going to kind of come to you a little bit. We talked about statutory damages. But that statutory damages don't max out what you're potentially entitled to in remedy because you may have actual damages. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of actual damages and first of all, what actual damages are and what they entail in a data breach scenario?
So unlike statutory damages, which are, as Mona said, awarded just basically per violation because the company did something, you may be entitled to statutory damages. Actual damages focus on, what actual harm did the victim suffer here. And what makes sense in terms of compensation for that. So in its simplest form, you have just, the stress, the anxiety, things like that, dealing with a data breach in particular, where your information is out there, your most sensitive information, and you feel vulnerable. That is a form of actual harm that you can seek damages for. In a sort of potentially more severe sense, you have things like, there are a ton of things that can result from being victim to a data breach. People can open up accounts under your name. It can be a week after, it can be a year later. You may receive a letter from a collection letter for an account that you had never heard of. So all these sorts of things are forms of harm, actual harm that you could seek damages for.
Exactly right. And I think you're going to see some synergy between the different practice areas that we do at Kazerouni Law Group, for example. So we do identity theft and we also do data breaches. And as Ali just laid out, some of the actual damages are derived from, let's say, somebody that's been a victim of a data breach, their information gets put on the dark web. Then sometime later, somebody uses that information to set up credit card accounts in the victim's name. And then unbeknownst to the victim, suddenly they've got all these credit cards, maybe a car loan, maybe even a mortgage in that name. And so then we are then shifting our practice concentration in helping that consumer from the data breach into the identity theft. And of course, there is some overlap over there as well, because the identity theft may not happen within even a year or 2 years or even 5 years of that data breach. And that's why data breaches are so dangerous, and people can be victims way past the time of the breach, and they would have totally forgotten about that. And Mona, how would somebody know if they're the victim of a data breach?
So oftentimes, in most cases anyway, whenever a company has a data breach, they're required to report it to the state or states that it's affected people in. So for here in California, oftentimes it gets reported to the California Attorney General. And then at some point after that, notices get sent out to victims of the data breach. So oftentimes people can get that in the mail, sometimes email. So, the bottom line for anyone in data breaches or debt collection cases, anything really, take a look at your mail. Sometimes there's stuff out there that's pretty important. It's a pretty simple form looking letter. Most of the time, the only difference for each individual is going to be their name and address that appears on it. And the rest of it's going to be kind of a general, often vague description of the data breach. And it kind of lets them know around when it may have happened, and might give a few more details than that. And that will give them a clue that they may have been a victim of a data breach.
Exactly. And then, obviously you mentioned, we're pretty blessed in California, but we also have offices outside of California in different states. What if you're a victim of a data breach outside of California where you don't have statutory damages?
Sure. So, obviously not only Californians have rights. Statutorily, we got a little bit more protection, but, outside of California, there's still common law claims or unfair business practices claims against these companies. Certainly you're still suffering an invasion of privacy. There may be contracts that were breached, things like that, just unfair business practices for that failure to maintain and safeguard the information the way they should have. So certainly there's remedies for people outside of California as well. And slowly we're starting to see other states enact similar statutes, maybe not identical to the one in California, but hopefully other states catch on and provide this to their consumers as well.
Exactly. So Ali, somebody calls us, actually strike that. Like, what can a consumer do before a breach to help protect themselves against a breach? But most of the breaches are really happening with businesses. But post-breach, once they're aware that a breach has happened, what can they do to protect themselves moving forward?
Sure. So, the way I view data breaches is sort of twofold. There's the first step is really, okay, this happened. What can I do now to assume as a victim of a data breach to, one, hold this company accountable for me and also on everyone else's behalf who may be in my position. And that's where a lawsuit comes in, right? This is sort of the first step, is how can I hold this company accountable? And this is usually done with a class action, something that where you have leverage as a consumer to really entice change their practices, to take steps, whatever steps they take to ensure that something like this doesn't happen again, and to hopefully compensate everyone who was a victim to this breach. Now, the second part of it goes directly to your question. Now, what can I do? I know my information's out there. Let's say I file a suit. Let's say I don't. But what can I do to protect myself? Because like you said, I can see consequences from this or ramifications of the breach tomorrow. I may not see it for 5 years. I may never see it at all. It all comes down to credit reports. In my opinion, I think it's the biggest and most surefire way of being able to something that you can check on a consistent basis, where you can look through it and see accounts that are the same. If anyone is, should I hold on? We can start this over.
No, okay, since we've done it, I'm not, on my end, I look okay. Ali's a little choppy, but Mona, you're very blurry.
Yeah, I think I'm having an issue with my feed. I don't know if it's back yet, but
Do I still look choppy?
you guys,
No,
you guys,
your audio was choppy, but your video was okay. But yeah,
you guys both look okay to me.
okay now.
Okay, I'll go back to it. All comes down to credit reports.
Okay, yeah, let's start.
Yeah. So in my opinion, it really all comes down to credit reports. Viewing your credit reports regularly, whether it's once a month, once every few months, at least once a year, is a great way of just sort of having a nice overview of any and all accounts that may have been opened up under your name that aren't being reported to the credit bureaus. So I always tell clients, look, if you know your data's out there really isn't any way of knowing, like you said, it goes to the dark web, whether someone's going to buy your data, whether someone's going to use your data. This is how you check to see, hey, this doesn't look right. I don't remember opening up this account. And I cannot tell you how many times we have clients who call in, who take our advice, they check their credit reports, and they're able to spot an inaccuracy, something that doesn't look right. And it gives us a lot more sort of flexibility and leverage to go ahead and take the offense of that, as opposed to take the offensive there, as opposed to waiting. And now, 2 years later, this individual is being sued on some account that they've never heard of. Now, first we have to defend them and then take care of the rest. So I think the point is, like you said, us and other consumer firms out there that handle things like identity theft issues, credit reporting issues, there is always recourse if you do find that your data has been used and you see some information on your credit report that's not yours, you're getting collection letters that don't belong to you. There are steps we can take, but the sooner you catch it, the better, for things like, statute of limitations, how long do I have to file a lawsuit, but really just for your own peace of mind to nipping something in the bud before it gets out of hand.
Okay. I totally agree with everything Ali says. Just to supplement that also, first, to basically reiterate what Ali said, you get a free credit report from all the three major bureaus every year. You should definitely exercise that. But more imminently, as soon as you learn about a data breach, in my opinion, you should probably, perhaps if you're in a position to be able to afford it, it shouldn't be more than like $10 a month, $10, $15 a month, is maybe pay for a credit monitoring service. There's a plethora of them. And these services, you can buy them from the bureaus themselves, tell you if they see that your data is on the dark web, and they'll report that to you if there's strange activity on your credit report. And they'll even tell you if your credit report is going up and down on a weekly or daily basis as it happens in real time. But if you're particularly scared, you can even go one step beyond that and put a credit freeze on all your credit reports. And what it does is that no one can get credit without you specifically saying, yes, I agree to basically open up my credit for somebody to view it. And if you put a freeze on, nobody can take a line of credit without you knowing about it. And I think that's a it's a defensive method to take, but for a period of time while you're getting all your ducks in a row, that is something that you can affirmatively do, and it shouldn't cost you any money at all to do that.
Absolutely. And that's a great point. I tell clients, even who have not been victim to data breach yet, considering our line of work and the number of, sort of credit reporting issues that we find, I tell everyone, hey, unless you're someone who, for work or whatever it is, you're constantly seeking out new lines of credit every month, there's really no downside to freezing your credit. It doesn't hurt your score. You can continue as a consumer who's frozen your credit to pool your own credit reports during that process. And let's say your credit reports are frozen, you want to go out and get a car tomorrow, you can unfreeze it just for a period of time. So you can unfreeze it, for instance, for 30 days, gives you enough time to get that car that you wanted, and then it'll go back to being frozen. So I completely agree.
Okay, great. And then finally, changing gears a little bit, Mona. In California, there's a differentiation between medical data breaches and other types of other types of data breaches. So do you want to kind of educate the audience to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, data breaches affect all sorts of organizations and companies, and some of those happen to be hospitals or healthcare providers. people that have confidential medical information and not just, a name and, other private personal information. So for, let's say a hospital, for example, most people are familiar with the, HIPAA. They're familiar when they go to a hospital, they might see a HIPAA release form or something that says HIPAA on it. It's something that most people have heard of. But a lot of people haven't heard of the, sort of the California mini version called the Confidentiality of Medical Information Act, or the CMIA, since that's a mouthful. So, here in California, similar to the CCPA, under the CMIA, people have, the availability of statutory damages if they're a victim of a data breach from, let's say, their healthcare provider. The information is going to be a little different. It's going to be your confidential medical information instead of just, a name and another data point. And the statutory damages are also different. So under the CMIA, you have $1,000 nominal statutory damages if you're a victim of a data breach for medical information. And, there's not necessarily a requirement that you show actual damages to get that. So, you don't have to have that identity theft occur before you have that available to you. So, and that's built right into the statute. So that's something that, I think is really important. You don't have to show that, one, you had your information, released in a medical data breach, plus you have identity theft. It's something that's built into the statute provided to these people who are victims of these data breaches.
Very good, right? And then Ali, would you act differently to a medical data breach if you're a consumer to a different type of data breach once you've learned about it, or would you would you say the advice is pretty much the same?
I mean, so I think all the things that you would do in the event of a normal data breach, so normal data breach, you would still want to do in the event of a medical breach. I would say that sort of just the feeling I get from clients who are victim to a medical data breach, not that it's more serious, but they tend to be a little more stressed about it. There's sort of a sense of greater vulnerability knowing what type of information is out there. There may be things specific to your case and specific to the type of medical breach that occurred that may cause myself or someone like Mona to, advise you slightly differently and maybe have you do a few things that you wouldn't need to do in other cases. But for the rest, I think it's really is case specific. It becomes really important to call someone and explain exactly what the breach was so that we could figure out what the best course of action would be.
Agreed. And I think, with medical data breaches, obviously there's information about your medical, ailments and, illnesses and things that you've that have happened to you that make it potentially embarrassing for the consumer. But also, but don't get it wrong. There's also usually on medical information, social security numbers, date of birth, addresses, and your name, all the money bits of information for a scammer to go and be able to set up false accounts in your name. So, if someone has breached a hospital, they may get your private information about, whatever medical procedures you've had. But the most important information to a scammer and a breacher is obviously the things that they can monetize, which are those, things that I've just mentioned. So, don't just think of it in a medical term. Think about it like it also in, from a lens of how can they use it to hurt me and defraud me, and those are the bits of information that I think are common to all types of data breaches, medical or otherwise. And Ali, since you're the head of the intake at our law firm, before we wrap this up, can you just tell us, does this cost the consumers anything?
Absolutely not. Any consumer firm worth their salt will not charge you for a consultation for something like this or any other consumer matter. I would say the best advice I can give is the second you hear about a breach that you think you're involved in, just give us a call. It's completely free. We'll walk you through every step, regardless of whether you choose to sign up with us and file a lawsuit.
And even after the consultation, which is obviously free, they still wouldn't have to pay anything, right?
Absolutely. If you recall, we had to edit out this video because I was constantly getting calls from potential consumers out there who have this exact problem. So whether we represent you now, tomorrow, or never, you are always welcome to give me a call on my direct line, and I'll always be here.
Well, with that said, Ali, Mona, thank you so much. If you're watching, listening, please, if you even suspect that you've been breached, give Ali a call. He's waiting right now.
Very impatiently, very impatient.
Exactly. Thanks for your insight, guys. And until next time, keep it legal.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.